Welcome back to Love's Legacy podcast. Thank you for being here. We are so excited and a little nervous for today because it is our first interview on our podcast. And we're so honored, Brandie, that you have agreed to come on and share. I think it's so aptly timed after it became a 5-part mini-series actually of healing and exposing my time in the network marketing industry. And so we are bringing Brandie on to have a deeper conversation about the psychology all around it. So I'm just going to read a little bit about her bio and then we're going to get into it. So Brandie is a mother of 2 based in Toronto, a psychotherapist in clinical supervision and president of Flipping the Pyramid, a nonprofit peer support group committed to aiding individuals in their recovery from commercial cults. As an MLM recovery advocate, Brandie believes everyone deserves freedom of mind and speaks out against the abuses of power and coercion perpetrated by MLM scams. You can read her writing on Substack and find her profile on Instagram, which we will link in the show notes. And I am just so excited to have this conversation. I think it's a full circle moment, and there is some unique similarities in our history, and one being that we were both involved in the same company for a long period of time. And your speaking out has really been helpful for me in my untangling of my time in a commercial cult and starting to understand myself, because I think one of the biggest things is feeling so silly of having done that. And so to hear from a woman like you, and you are so eloquent in all that you share, and you are such a voice in the anti-MLM movement, that I know our listeners are going to get so much value from it. So thank you so much, Brandie, for being here, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I loved hearing your 5-part, the whole. Yeah. And I have to tell you, because Julie Anderson had forwarded it to me, and I was like, wait a second, like, is that Sandy? I was really excited to see that it was you, because you were at the very first in-person Juice Plus event I ever attended. And I was like, wow, I just resonated with you so very much. So it felt very, very validating and full circle to see you come out and speak out so clearly, loudly, and proudly.
Thank you. So maybe share with everyone your story and your journey and how you even got on to this path that you're now on.
Yeah. So I used to work for Good Life Fitness, which is a very large Canadian fitness club company. I was there for almost 10 years, and then I got pregnant. And when I was on my maternity leave, through Good Life, I had kind of worked my way up into a head office position where I was in human resources. And it was all about health and fitness. That was already part of my identity. And then when I got pregnant, I started to get scared of what it was going to look like to be a working mother. I started to crunch the numbers in terms of how much daycare in downtown Toronto costs and how much money I'd be bringing home after. And it didn't seem to make sense. So I was actively looking for another option, because my job at the time was like a 50-hour-a-week contract, a lot of travel. It just didn't feel conducive to having a child. And I said this to Marco, I know that on Always Marco channel, I know that my boss would have been flexible. They would have wanted to keep me. They would have, but I'd never even had that conversation. I just got scared and I wanted to look for something else. So I started taking, after my son was born, and I was exploring what my mothering philosophy was. I started taking parenting certifications, and I thought maybe that's what I could do. I could help other mothers like me. and I kind of veered off in many different directions, trying out different things. And then I became certified as a family health coach and received a manila envelope. I was going to grab a manila envelope that was an invitation to join Juice Plus under a very famous doctor whose work I'd already been following and who was the figurehead of the coaching certification that I took, which is now defunct. Doesn't exist anymore. I just found out. Yeah.
Good to know.
So at that time, MLM was really big. There was like the mommy wars going on where it was very like hotly debated whether you should co-sleep and breastfeed and this and that. And it felt like a very isolating time already. And then here was this like community who was going to validate my intuition and the way that I was doing things, and having this like holistic approach and natural approach and all of those things that already kind of resonated with who I thought that I was, who I felt I was. And then like next thing you know, it's like almost a decade later, the pandemic happened, and I'm like, not where I thought that I would be by then. I was not yet a national marketing director. I was doing all the things. And the longer time went on, the more I started to see things that I could no longer ignore, like really hardworking team members doing all the things like I had done and not breaking $200 a month, let alone what they're spending on having their whole family on it. And I wasn't able to buy that it was like my friend Emma's limiting beliefs that were holding her back. I was like, no, Emma's really awesome. She really wants this. She's really all in. So it was things like that that started to make me feel like I'd hit a wall. And so the first thing that I did when I hit that wall during the tail end of the pandemic was I said, I just need to take a break. I just need to kind of go offline and collect myself. I think, that the pandemic has worn me down and I need a break. So they supported that. And the more time I took offline, the more my own thoughts started to kind of bubble up, and I couldn't ignore them. I couldn't shove them back down because I wasn't in Zoom meetings every week. I wasn't listening to Voxer. I wasn't getting continuously indoctrinated and love bombed. So my voice got louder and louder and louder and louder. And then I hit another kind of wall where I was like, I can't go back.
Wow. And
my husband was like, WTF, because Terry, I wonder if you'll appreciate this. He felt he supported me through so many years of like making less than minimum wage that at the point where I decided I couldn't do it anymore, I was actually making money. And he's like, this is like back pay. Like, you've more than earned this. Ride it out. You are owed this. That was his kind of stance on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I feel sick though on the 10th of every month. Like, I feel sick. I can't accept it. I want to sever this relationship now that I know what I know.
Wow.
Was he aware of what you were finding out? Was he involved in that process?
I was telling him things. Yeah, I was showing him things, and he was like, okay, I get it, but like maybe you can not recruit and just ride it out. Right. They don't allow you to ride it out anymore because the covenant has changed. But the covenant that I signed, which is just so fucked up in and of itself, that it's called a covenant. The covenant that I had signed didn't say that I had to have a certain amount of activity to continue collecting a check. So he was like, ride it out till it's done. But then I think he saw the look in my eyes when I was like, you know what? I'll literally do anything. I will take on children and like run a little in-home daycare. I will do anything to not have to take this money and earn income a different way. I'll do anything. And he saw that. He's like, okay, I see how you're feeling. We'll figure it out.
That's awesome. What was he like during, like, when you first discovered it and when you probably came home being like, I'm going to solve all our financial needs and it's me, bet on me. Like, was he right away initially fully supportive, or was his intuition kind of up?
he wasn't like a fan of multi-level marketing by any means, but he believed in the doctor. So he came to some events with me, and he got like peripherally indoctrinated himself, and he does believe in me. So he really did. He really thought like, well, okay, I'm seeing these people on stage at the conference, and Brandie's awesome, so she could be there. Like, he believed that.
For sure.
Yeah, when you talked about him seeing the look in your eyes of like, I would literally rather do anything except for take this paycheck on the 10th. And I could relate to that experience so much, because I remember me and Sandy were sitting on the back porch, and I'm asking her questions about this new company that she's with when she joined Soul People. And actually, I didn't have much of a network marketing experience with her until that point. I had always known it was something from that she had done, but she wasn't quite doing it, but now she was starting it again. And there was a point where all these things were happening with this other company that were huge red flags. And I was asking her about it. And she said, no, I really believe that this is the way, this is what we've been working for so long. And then she would stop and say, but what else could I do? I just don't know what else could I do. And the question was, I could see it in her eyes of like, I need to get out of this cycle and this thing that's I've started down this road. What else could I do? I could see it in her eyes and hear it in the voice. And that really started pulling the threads of like, well, if you believe in it so much, why would you even question what else can you do? And from there, it was a no-brainer. Okay, there's something going on more than, it's so much deeper than what I even realize at the moment, or what she even realizes. And we have to start looking at that and support it that way.
I
What
definitely resonate with that.
What I'm so fascinated by, and you must have been too, like, how did you even start to go down the path that you went down to become a psychotherapist in supervision? And like, was that sparked by you coming out and then recognizing all the cult brainwashing that had happened?
Well, I always was interested in psychology. Like, that is the truth of who I am, and what I was meant to do was work in that field. Like, when I really was exploring who am I, because you're detangling from this MLM persona, like, who am I actually? It took a while, because I was depressed for a long time. And I just read a lot of books for pleasure and listened to a lot of podcasts. And then, like I said, as that voice started getting stronger within me, it was like a light bulb went on. You were supposed to be a therapist, remember? Because like in high school, I used to buy used abnormal psychology textbooks to read for fun. So that was like a part of me that was always there. And then in that early journey, when I first started with Juice Plus, and I was getting hired to do parent coaching and like holistic sleep solutions, I would go into these people's homes, which I would also recommend Juice Plus to them. I would tie that in. I would go into their homes and big eye roll. I go into their homes and I would talk to them, and I'd be like, holy shit, this is beyond, like, the inner knowing is like, this is beyond my fucking scope. And I didn't feel ethically fully okay with going into their homes with certifications. I felt like I needed much more education. So I originally started taking psychotherapy when the government in Ontario had this program that they no longer have, where after your maternity leave, you can extend your time off and take this free business program through the government, where they would continue to pay you what your maternity benefits were for a whole extra year while you took their business school, which was incredible. Like, I have friends who started really cool businesses from this program. So I had started going back to school, and then the business program said, you can't do an MLM. Like, this isn't what this is for. Okay, guys, like, just so we're clear, we're not paying you to do your Arbonne business or whatever. And so that was my out. So I actually left Juice Plus during that time, during my first year of schooling, and used the excuse of, I'm not allowed to. So there was this part of me that always knew this isn't like adding up. But then after I had my second son and had poor health from poor choices, hormones, and all of the things, I hit like a rock bottom point where I was like, I miss being surrounded in that healthy community and how I felt at that time. I want to go back there again. So that's how I went back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense.
And then I was like, oh shit, I was supposed to be a psychotherapist when I took that long sabbatical period at the end of the pandemic.
Fascinating. So, like, really, I am so wanting to dig into all of the psychology around it. I know that since I've shared my story, I've had so many people reach out with validation for themselves of, I always felt this was off and I felt that was off. And I, kept being in the community because I thought it was something to do with me. And now I recognize like the game is rigged. And this has been such a release for me to, let myself off the hook. I know for me, there's also been people that have come with vitriol and vehemence against just speaking out against the industry or specifically the leader. And that's a whole psychology and further proof of what that like cult programming is. So what is that deprogramming piece when it comes to time inside specifically a commercial cult, but any cult too? Because I've also had people reach out that were in religions that they had gotten out of, and that the stories that I've shared have really activated their, healing around what their experience was. So like, let's get into it.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like deprogramming, the one thing that I've learned is that you can't make someone get out. There were like people back in the old days who would like have an intervention and like do a deprogramming, and it was determined that that was unethical, that wasn't psychologically safe to enforce someone's like wake up from a cult. So they really have to get there by themselves, which is really challenging when you are a loved one and you're watching this happen. I mean, never say never. Maybe there are occasions when it can happen but I think it's so individual depending on the person who's in. How many, like Janja Lalich uses the metaphor of like putting things on a shelf, like because there's red flags that we like set aside and like, we're just going to set that here. And then eventually it breaks because it can't withstand anymore. And so I think it's going to depend on how full that shelf is already when that loved one maybe plants a seed of doubt or whatever it is. So never say never, but to me, what I've learned is that it has to come from within the individual, and our best chance at supporting someone is to just keep them connected to who they are. I think for me, like I was in it for almost a decade, and I had a husband I had been married to for over 20 years. And I have my best friend since second grade, another best friend since I was 16. So I like have really good besties who have known me forever. And yet still I was in that long, and even kind of roped them in a bit. Mm-hmm. So I was lucky that I had them to fall back on when I got out, and not everybody has those protective factors in place. And so then if they are to leave, then they have to literally rebuild everything. And that can be incredibly overwhelming and not for us to say is necessarily the safest choice for them,
Yeah. Wow.
That makes total sense. Would you say the fear of isolation may be one of the biggest roadblocks in people coming to that decision of like, I feel this train coming for a long time that something is wrong, but knowing that if I say anything or do anything different than the norm and what I built as the norm for myself, it's going to lead to isolation and, being ostracized by my community?
Yeah, for sure. And I know that the community weaponizes that fear. I remember when everyone was leaving for Modere and my my up line, which is who I worked closely with, and her up line would be on Voxer, like telling me, I don't know how so-and-so could do it. We're like a family. How could they do that? The company's been so good to them, and now they're just turning their backs. And it's like a kind of a way of saying, like, don't you do that, because this is what we'll think of you. We're telling you what we think of them as being a defector. And that's not normal. And that was one of the things I put on the shelf, because I was thinking, like, when people left Good Life Fitness, it wasn't like this.
Totally.
Like, you can just go to another job and you would have an exit interview, and the company would want to know your feedback so that they could improve. They wouldn't take it as this personal, like, evil attack against them. They don't look at themselves as infallible. Any good organization is always wanting to improve. And here Juice Plus was like truly acting pious and infallible, because you have to be crazy to go sell ground up chicken feet.
Totally. It's so someone that also, the piece of, I would consider myself a pretty smart person, and the aftermath of seeing it all and recognizing, holy smokes, all of my identity was wrapped up in this. And how did I get hooked up into this cult? And the feeling really stupid or really silly and embarrassed about that. Like, what would you speak to someone that might be in that swirl? Like, how does it happen to, real smart people? How do they get hooked into it? And is it oftentimes people that already have a wound that is, somewhat, their network marketing can be a salve for that wound artificially?
Well, in terms of, like, to speak to the wound part first, I think no matter what, even if you've had like a perfect upbringing with wonderfully supportive parents and no dysfunction, we're always going to come upon moments of transition and vulnerability. And that's the perfect time where the cult likes to swoop in. And that's why they use fear induction tactics. Because even if you're not coming in with that vulnerability, they're going to show you a presentation that's going to share how we're all swimming in a toxic soup and eating frankenfoods and breathing in, and like, you're just going to start to feel really distressed. And then they'll give you, induce the fear or exploit the fear, and then show how we are the solution. So, but don't worry, we got you. And then you're like, okay. So no matter what, there's going to be a vulnerability, and they're just going to try to, like, throw spaghetti at the wall to hopefully list the one that you're feeling, the pain point that you have at that moment. Mom guilt,
so
whatever
true.
it is.
That's so true.
So none of us are immune to that moment of vulnerability. And now, especially now more than ever, none of us immune to feeling scared, uncertain, all these things, and wanting like a package solution and community all wrapped up in one neat package. And then the other thing that you were mentioning about, sorry, what was the other part of the question?
Was just like what are the...
right. Feeling foolish.
Yeah. And like, how does it happen so subtly that you don't even realize it's happening?
Yeah. So something that I had heard was that if someone is looking for a therapist, because there isn't a ton that I've ever seen that specialize in cult recovery. So if you're looking for a therapist that's going to be able to understand what you're dealing with coming out of an MLM, a safe bet is to go for a therapist who deals with abusive relationships, because it's the same playbook. It's the love bombing, the grooming process, all of that manipulation that none of us are immune to. Very incredibly smart people get swept up into these things. I'm immediately thinking of, have you guys seen the documentary the book of Slonim Woods 9, and the documentary, I can't remember the name of the documentary, but it's about this man who started a cult within a college campus. His name was Larry.
No, we haven't seen
it.
Okay. That was one of the things that I learned about on my exit when I was like delving into cults. And this man, the book Sloan and Woods 9 is so great. I'll send you the link to the documentary. But one of the women, one of the victims, was incredibly brilliant psychology, like going for a psychology PhD, and got swept right into it. And he completely destroyed her psychological well-being and destabilized her for a chunk of time. And now she's out and she's recovering, but it was a really good example of how, like, really truly no one's immune. It doesn't matter how smart you are. We're all human beings, and we're all vulnerable to, we're all wired to trust. That we can't survive as infants if we don't trust somebody. So we've already got that, in our psychology.
Yeah, that's interesting. The trust piece too. I've found since we've kind of been on looking into a lot of these things, and actually my personal experience with Sandy as well, is like, I think within network marketing, especially, or cults, and the trust becomes so out of balance. It really, our earlier conversations were always about this over trusting. It's this contradictory way of looking at trust, of like, we should trust everything except for maybe someone who has an opinion or a dissenting view on something that we so hardly believe in. Don't trust that at all. And it was always trying to reconcile this. I don't understand what's happening, really. Like, there's so much trust for everything that fits the narrative that you want. It's like, trust everything, trust it. We actually went to a personal development course where they said trust everything and everyone. I was the only person that said, I'll be like, well, I don't trust everything completely. I assign trust on a scale, not just 100% trust for everything all the time. And then that was looked at as like, well, that's wrong. You can't live your life that way, because how can you ever manifest your destiny and all these things? And then as soon as you provide any sort of like dissenting opinion, it's like, well, you're just not a trustworthy, you don't trust, and you got to learn how to trust. And it's like, but there's such a contradiction between those two kind of theories on how you should interact and believe in things and believe in people. It was really like a red flag for seeing that there's something going on here that just doesn't add up. And I can see how that indoctrination from the communities can really play on people to believe, like, I have to trust because everybody else does, and look at them, and this is what they're telling us to do.
Yeah, they literally say, this is one of those things where you probably get flashbacks of things you heard and you're like, holy shit. Like, they literally say, if you want to be successful, you have to believe. So they're literally saying, don't ask questions. They're literally saying, blindly trust in the company. You have to believe in us. You have to believe in the product. You have to believe in your upline. You have to believe in the magical industry of network marketing, and in yourself and your ability to do this. And it's like, wow, they're telling us what they're telling us. For me, somebody said, it seems like people who work their way up high in network marketing tend to be kind of more type A, like follow recipes type of people. And I don't know if that's the case, but for me, for sure, if I'm given an instruction book, I will follow it. And I'm like, great, this is what I'm told to do. So I will do that. I will believe.
Yeah,
for sure.
And then after, I'm like, you do feel foolish. Like, man, the truth was in plain sight the whole time.
Yeah. And I look at it as like, you're taught to trust everything except for yourself in so many ways. It's like that, again, that contradictory message. Believe in
thinking.
Yeah. Believe in yourself if you believe and trust in us, but don't believe in yourself at all if you have any sort of thought or critical thinking, or I guess negative, which I don't necessarily believe that all critical thinking is negative, but that's another part of the indoctrination. And it's just, again, it's such a contradictory message. I can see how confusing that could be for someone. In my conversations with Sandy, I've asked her, when you're going through this and you were told this by a guy like Justin Prince, and she's saying, I felt I felt in my gut and I felt my intuition was like, wait a minute, something doesn't feel right here. And it was, you know, my question would be, how did you ignore that? How did you come to ignoring that? I felt that. She said, well, it was negative thinking and I wasn't trusting in the process. And at the same time, it seems to me like it's this, you're being led to not trust yourself more than people believe that they are trusting themselves.
Well, you're conditioned to override it. And you're also so deep in your own dishonesty and identity and keeping up appearances that like it's too risky to actually listen.
Have you ever heard that being a celebrity, there's this notion of like being a celebrity is actually a mental illness because of the state of mind that you're in? Like it's not a natural place to be a celebrity kind of thing. So if you are, like, there's so much extra care that's needed from a psychological standpoint. So I've been thinking about this with like being a top leader in a multi-level marketing, like similarly that, but nobody protects you. They induce it.
Yes.
They induce the insanity. And what I've come to realize in actually studying borderline personality organization, I connected these dots of like, they're inducing almost a borderline state of disassociation because they don't want you in reality at all. Denial, like block out any critical thinking, any negativity, just deny. So you're in a state of denial, which is that's not a healthy state of mind to be in. And narcissistic grandiosity. They want you to believe so strongly in your ability to be the 1%. That's a state of narcissistic grandiosity. And that's also not a really healthy place for you to be, and not a great place to be a caregiver in a family, to be in that frame of mind. So I'm thinking now, as I'm like focusing on recovery, that kids are going to have to be deconstructing from their upbringing in MLM world because of all of that entails with it.
Oh, well, that's so funny that you say that, because we were just having that conversation, like a really emotional conversation last night of recognizing and seeing the impact it's had on my children and some of their coping skills and habits, habitual ways of responding. Like, geez, it's so deep, the entanglement, that you're right. They are like kids of people that have been in MLM will need some care and with someone that has a knowledge and understanding of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like it's really from what I see too in that regard is the, you know, the MLM industry and the companies sell that time, that presence with your family, with your children. And what I've noticed and seen is it actually turns out to be the exact opposite. And I see that children of MLM families pay a really heavy price for what actually turns out to be the lack of presence from their parents that are involved in the industry and in network marketing. And we see it pop up dated all the time. Like, things have had to change in this household so drastically since Sandy left MLM, and it's a real struggle for the kids to kind of adjust and adapt. It has to be handled with such, you know, a care, but at the same time, like a sense of reality of what the situation really is, and helping them understand how different things are and the ways that we can all work together to try and adjust to the new way and the way things are going. And
I think too, like, what's the word? Exacerbated? Is that such a word? By like being a single parent too, for, you know, my son was 1.5 years, my daughter was 6. So most of their lives, I was a single mom and fully immersed in the indoctrination of MLM. So it's like a double whammy. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. And I mean, on the upside, it is true that children are resilient. And I think it's powerful role modeling for them. If I'm to be optimistic, it's powerful role modeling that they see us learning, changing course, and talking about it. Like, that's not everybody is going to have that resilience and show that like model that for their children. So yay us.
Yay, high five.
Yeah. That's been the biggest, I think one of the biggest challenges is knowing how resilient they are and finding that balance between, okay, we have to be honest and upfront about everything, but we also have to understand that it's such a huge shift for them as well, that it's going to be hard for them to understand as well. But we don't want to get into a situation where, you know, we're kind of downplaying things or not being honest about how things are going moving forward, or where we're at as a couple, or where we're at as their parents, or our moods in any situation. So like trying to find that balance between giving them enough information that they can be trusting of what's going on and not overwhelming them or overloading them at the same time, and recognizing when that could be happening and trying to navigate through all that. I think
yeah, keeping it age appropriate. Yeah.
I'm so curious. So you shared recently, I mean, again, you guys got to go follow Brandie. She puts out such good content, and it's going to be so helpful. I know that people that were connected to the podcast, and we connected you in some show notes, have found you, and it's been helpful for them. When it comes to, you shared this post about Davos and the kind of that way and use of manipulation and the gaslighting and the love bombing that happens if you're someone that is stepping out of it, like, and feeling isolated and maybe have gotten some resistance to it. I know I've shared with you some of the messages we got that were just nasty, which we'll share them on the video here on the replay. What is that, the Davos system, and what is the thing that people need to now recognize? Because it can be so hurtful when you get that. But if you just like step outside of it and look at it for what it is, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. So Darvo is when someone is speaking about how they've been wronged, or speaking about a wrongdoing, putting it out there, and then it could either be the perpetrator, the person who did the wrongdoing, or we might say a flying monkey, like meaning like the people that the followers that protect the perpetrator. They're often, that's what I've seen, is that it's more often the flying monkeys than the person at the top. The person at the top's just not dealing with it at all. And it's the flying monkeys doing all the busy work and putting out all the fires. In this context, in the MLM context, that's what I'm seeing. They will deny. So like that never happened. They will attack, like, you're just jealous, you're just bitter, you're just like, okay, you can be bitter when there's been a wrongdoing. That okay.
It's normal.
And then reverse victim and offender. So meaning like you're the person who is disturbing the peace of this like God-led, mission-driven, servant-hearted company, the company with a heart. Like, how could you be speaking ill of them? You must be Satan.
Yeah. Totally.
So rather than addressing, and that's everything that I received too. There was never like you have a point, or this is why this, or anything. It was just like, oh, I'm sorry you were hurt, but how could you paint this beautiful company with the brush of all MLMs when it is so special and unique?
Yeah, and it's like an altruistic, like all the good we're doing, all the good of the community, when ultimately that reaction or that nastiness comes from a place of like protecting their income too. Like, let's be real, that in around it, underneath it is like, oh gosh, if anyone on my team catches wind and had any kind of respect for Brandie or any kind of respect for Sandy, we rhyme, then that might go in and they might question. So what would that lead to? Them getting out of the team and that affecting their bottom line ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah, that I did have somebody say that to me, actually. It said, some of my team follow you, or I did connection calls and helped recruit them. And this person who was in my downline, she was like, I don't want them seeing, I don't like how you're showing up. online, because I don't want my team seeing this and thinking that I have ever love bombed them, because I am a genuine person. And it's like, I don't know how to not expose the playbook for what it is. You might not have, like, when I sent people gifts or complimented people, nobody's saying, I'm going to love bomb now. Mm-hmm. Nobody's saying that, but that doesn't mean that we're not doing it when we're showering. And for some of us, like for me, that was so easy and fun, because I do see the good in people. I do love to highlight the good in people and cheer them on. And I love to give people gifts. I love to, that all that love bombing piece was like the fun part of the job. Mm-hmm. But in retrospect, it's like, yeah, clearly I'm not doing that anymore because I'm not benefiting from it. And that's hard to admit, and it feels really shitty, but that's the truth.
Yeah, well, some of the feedback that you got, Sandy, was some women reaching out saying, I felt for a long time something that was wrong. And one of the pieces is that when I was they would say
their lowest, when
I had these events, that I was at my lowest and I couldn't work the business, nobody was there anymore. Mm-hmm. And they felt left alone and isolated. All the love bombing stopped, and all of the caring had pretty much stopped. And they were looking around saying, where is everybody? I thought I'm the greatest ever, and we were part of this community. And they have relayed how it left them feeling like really just isolated within that, and even more scared to examine their feelings around the community and the wellness and everything and all the praise and accolades. And really, when it came down to it, nobody was really around. They were all moved on to the next person that was coming in that needed all of that care and attention to help them work their business. And they were kind of left by the side until the moment they decided to recommit. And then once they recommitted to it, it all came back to them again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you say about the connection of the personal growth industry and MLM? Like, I think it's a ripe for the pickings group of people that also, that personal growth world, which I was a proponent of, lover of, deep diver of, like hundreds and thousands of dollars spent inside that world to try and work on myself, which what I recognize now was just a way to avoid myself. Ultimately, the truth of who I am and standing in my truth was the healer for me, or the thing that put me on my true healing path. Mm-hmm. So how closely tied are those industries, and what are your thoughts on the use of it?
Yeah. So have you guys heard of like the Amway tools scam?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's all, it fits together like a perfect puzzle, because a lot of this personal development space is all around like the law of attraction and the power of positive thinking and prosperity gospel and all of these ideas that the power is within you. And, like there are bits of truth to that. Like clearly, if I'm thinking, let's say, for example, that MLMs induce narcissistic grandiosity, denial, and dissociation, I'm going to see that more because that's where my brain is looking for that. So that's, I guess, law of attraction, right? Like there's enough truth to it that it can resonate and be a billion-dollar industry. At the same time, there's a lot of danger attached to it and it's not, evidence-based or like considered psychologically safe practice to like some pieces of like psychotherapy or psychology are kind of twisted and used in this like perverse way for power and control and all of that is what I'm seeing. So very convenient to say that it's all within you when you're signing somebody up for a rigged system, as you said. Like, okay, perfect. Like that fits our narrative perfectly, because when they inevitably fail, it's real easy for them to just be told to go look in the mirror. Mm-hmm. They're not manifesting hard enough. They must not truly believe. Like there's a lot of places you can look instead of at the system, instead of at the compensation plan, instead of at the leadership. And I did a deep dive into the history of multi-level marketing. And what I found was that that ended up being the key to making multi-level marketing what it was when they learned how to weaponize language. It was like the cemetery plot salesman who, I may be getting the history a little bit, double check, do your own research. But what I remember learning that it used to be way back in the day, that the whole funeral industry was different. It was more public. It was accessible to all. And somebody decided to profit off of it and privatize it and all of that. And it was this cemetery plot salesman that ended up using this fear-based sales strategies and weaponizing language, that ended up being a big part of what the MLM personal development industry is. Taking from concepts How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie, which that guy is a fraudster in and of itself. There's always so many more layers of the onion to keep peeling back and peeling back and peeling back as you go deeper.
Is that why it's so hard for people to speak out honestly against the personal growth or wellness industry, because they do borrow from those elements of truth when it comes to psychology, but at the same time, it seems like it's really hard. I notice it's more and more now people are starting to speak out about the dangers of that type of industry. But I remember our initial conversations when we would talk about things like just anything like Reiki healing or things, and I would have questions, and it was almost offensive to if you're questioning it, then you're against people having growth, and everyone can start somewhere, and whatever works that leads them to on a path of getting to know themselves better is okay. But is it okay if it's, unnecessarily taking a lot of money out of their product or out of their pocket, or sending them down a path where they're really avoiding a lot of the things that are really going on for somebody else's benefit? And it just seems like it's so hard for people to really want to question that.
Yeah, it is really super complicated. There is one organization that I heard of on my way out, called Seek Safely. Have you heard of that nonprofit? So Seek Safely was started by, did you ever hear about the James Arthur Ray sweat lodge incident where some people passed away in the sweat lodge because they had been trained by this James Arthur Ray guy who was on Oprah and touted, and he was in The Secret and all of that. So he was this self-help personal development guru, and he was telling them to work past your limitations. These are just your limitations, your blocks getting in your way. And so they had so learned to second guess their own intuition that some of them passed away in the sweat lodge because they didn't know anymore what was where they ended and personal development began. They didn't know their edges anymore, right? Which is where the tremendous danger comes into play. So the sister of one of the victims of the sweat lodge incident started Seek Safely along with Dr. Glenn Doyle. And so I think that's an avenue for people to explore potentially. It's we don't have to necessarily say all personal development is bad, but where are the ethics and who's going to try to regulate that, because it's such a wildly unregulated industry. So I think those are important questions to ask.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is so wildly unregulated. I can see how it would be so hard for anyone to really discern, what is beneficial and what is legitimate or what is not beneficial or what's just out there, to kind of separate them for money, usually on a subscription basis, an ongoing basis with no end in sight.
Can you share a little bit about Flipping the Pyramid and that support group? Because it's a really cool thing that you're doing, and I'm excited to attend this month's. But yeah, do you want to just share what that kind of support looks like, and also how it's been rewarding for you and illuminating? I'm sure inside those groups, you're probably gathering lots of data and a deeper understanding of it all.
Yeah. So the idea for Flipping the Pyramid first started last May when I went to Washington, D.C. to speak out about multi-level marketing. And there were like people from the FTC there and lawyers and academics and like this wide roster of people all speaking on the topic of multi-level marketing. And at that time, Julie Anderson was dealing with like backlash from a multi-level marketing company that didn't like what she was sharing in her YouTube. And I saw the stress that in her almost like saying, peace out, I guess I'm done now. And I was like, she has impacted so many lives, including my own. She was the first person I started talking to. What a horrible shame if she's silenced. So that was playing on me, and I was seeing the effect that the situation was having on her. And I was like, where's the support for Julie? Why is the FTC saying, do your own research, and basically counting on people like Julie and whistleblowers, the victims to do the educating and the advocacy? Why is it our job, and who's looking out for us? Nobody? What the hell? Like, it just felt so unjust. So, and like, there's lawyers in this room, and I'm thinking like, I wanted to go up to one of them and go, help Julie. Like, like we need to work together. So the words flipping the pyramid came into my head. Like, we need to continue to empower the whistleblowers so that we can start to right some of this. And I thought we need to connect people. We need to connect whistleblowers to lawyers who will give free legal advice. We need to start a fund in case somebody needs representation if they're slapped with a cease and desist or whatever it may be. We need to continue to enable these voices to be heard when they're the voices that the FTC is pointing people to. So that was part of it. And then the other part of it was, we've got all of this incredible content available, but like when somebody is out there in their life and they are bumping up against a trigger from the healing journey that they're on, where do they go to process that when there isn't really a lot of psychotherapists or mental health professionals that are necessarily trained in this area? In fact, some of them might even be reps themselves, bringing their patients to conference. So I thought we need to have like a peer support group, like a place where we can come and like talk about with other people who've like had similar journeys and say like, this happened. Like, did you guys watch this? Have you read this book? And like process it together and feel like a reclamation too of community that isn't transactional. That's like just there for you. So that's what that's all about.
I got goosebumps. Like, yeah, it's so needed. It's such important work. And you're so right. Julie Anderson has been kind of a big voice and way shower, which definitely was so helpful for us. And when Terry discovered her, it was like instrumental in untangling this all. So I love that. That's such good work, Brandie. Thank you for like, taking up the sword in the battle against all of this. It's a huge thing.
Thank you. So the support group meetings, if anyone's interested, so far they're once a month, but we want to work towards twice a month for sure. And who knows, maybe one day it'll be once a week, but that's what we can manage for now. So usually the second Tuesday of the month.
Okay, we'll link that too.
Yeah. Brandie, are you still fearful when you speak out or when you do interviews or come on, write your articles? Are you still fearful of backlash? And is there things specifically that you fear will come back to harm you from speaking out, or ways or methods or things that maybe even still do happen?
That's an interesting question. I was more fearful. I like super commend you, Sandy, for speaking out so soon. My mind is blown at where you're at. Because it took me a lot longer. It took me like a lot of conversations with Julie, a lot of scared, a lot of like vague posting before I could like, okay, here it is. But it didn't feel like for me, like there was an option. So even though there was fear, I felt like I had to find a way to do it anyway, because to not do so would have felt, it would have felt like they won. They got all this out of me. They just extracted from me. And for what? So I needed to like reclaim my autonomy. I needed to like, hey, I shouted your shit from the rooftops for how long? So now I'm going to shout my shit from the rooftops. Now it's my turn. So I felt like I felt almost as if I had no choice and had to do it anyway. And then the longer that I'm out, the braver I'm getting with like saying the name, like saying Juice Plus, because, and like I was saying to you earlier, Sandy, when you when you guys were talking about like, there is no risk to telling the truth. That's what I anchor myself in. I'm just telling the truth. I'm just telling my story. I'm telling my experience. So being honest has always been my guiding light. So why should it stop now?
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I would really credit how quickly I was able to speak out to Terry and his support in it. As like we crammed 2 years worth of deprogramming and understanding and realizations in the course of a few months to be able to be in that space. And yeah, it's so true. And there's kind of, I'm sure you could relate. There's like this fire in you of like, gosh, this whole world and being inside this kind of brainwashing and cult for me, nearly 15 years, for you over 10 or nearly 10. It's like this fire and almost like an anger, like, damn, I missed this gap of time. I remember when I was, feeling like I'm drowning inside, not knowing what else I could do, but somewhere inside me knowing I needed to get out. And do you know that Fleetwood Mac song, Landslide, came on the radio? And I just started crying, recognizing like that song is actually about my business. Like how depressing. All this time had passed and I missed out on this. And it's all for what? For nothing, for material. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always interested in the role of forgiveness in being able to come to terms with leaving an MLM or a cult or commercial cult. And I see that as the real struggle. I think when I look around and I hear everybody's stories and at the different phases they are in kind of maybe exiting MLM or speaking out against it, it really seems like the struggle comes from the ability to forgive. And it's like such this two-way street, right? It's people forgiving themselves for the things that they have done, and people forgiving the people above them for what the roles that they played getting them into, and really not knowing, like finding it really difficult to navigate that forgiveness part. And when I see that and I hear people talk, it's like, I can see sometimes that they're hesitant to go to the full extent of what's really going on. And it appears to be a part of that forgiveness of how do I acknowledge everything and have this view of myself where I can forgive myself for the things that I've done. Because I think it's important to recognize for anyone leaving, there is a part in time where you have to face the fact that I did all these shitty things. Like I really did do them. It wasn't somebody else. Yeah. It wasn't an old me. It wasn't any of these other things. It was just a part of me. It was who I am in that moment. I did them. And getting to a place where you can forgive yourself for them, to recognize the full scope of everything that's going on, is actually the key to feeling good about your relationships moving forward and getting forgiveness from people like your children or your partners that maybe there was turmoil, or family members that you had tried to get involved in things. And that fear of not being able to get it kind of seems to hold people back from really recognizing the full extent. And even so far, I would say with a lot of people, serves to keep them in it and not wanting to look at it at all and just keep going. Do you find that forgiveness of yourself was a huge key to getting to where you're at today?
Yeah, I mean, well, two parts to it. I find forgiveness with yourself, but I would say for the other people, and a different word that I would choose instead of forgiveness is I would say resolved, like feeling resolved versus forgiving them. Because it's kind of like in attachment theory, for example, like you could have let's say, an upbringing that results in like a more anxious attachment style. But through therapy, through like a healthy marriage, through really good friendships and other things, you could come to a place of like earned secure attachment and come to a place of like resolution with your past where like, let's say, I'll use the example of my father. I know that he didn't have the certain tools that I necessarily needed. And so I'm not angry at him because I'm at a place of peace. I don't necessarily forgive him because I don't know that he didn't intentionally cause harm, but I'm resolved, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like it couldn't have happened any other way. That's he did what he could with what he had, and I didn't get what I needed, and I found it elsewhere, and I'm resolved, and I'm earned secure attachment. With an upline, like, who's to friggin' say if they're still the victim, if they'll ever be willing to face what they've been? Have they been complicit? Would you call it complicit? Like, who's to say, because they're still in. I know with myself, I can forgive myself because I know I wasn't really complicit. I thought I was acting out of trust for others. And once I knew different, I behaved different, I pivoted. Have they gone to that place where they've actually faced any moral injury, or are they still like doubling down and digging in? And if so, I can't forgive that because they're not sorry. So I'm just resolved, and I know that that conversation will probably never happen, and I'm okay with that. So a bit different.
Yeah, I understand that completely. I understand where you're coming from. And I didn't mean in the context of like trying to go have, these conversations or I forgive you, or needing even that part of it. I'll always relate a story with my father when it comes to this is like, I grew up in, an abusive household as a child. And one of the things that I had to learn is, again, it came back to that. It all came down to forgiving myself for the things, my actions, my consequences that had happened post events as I grew older. And what I really found was that initial looking at the full truth of who I was in those moments led to this forgiveness I could have for myself that came from a place of understanding. And really, resolve or forgiveness, I almost think that the word could be interchangeable here, because I don't feel forgiveness means like a physical act of needing something from the other person. But what it allowed me to do is, because I was able to forgive myself and start learning about boundaries and accept who I was in all of aspects of my life and all of my history, it opened up this dialogue between me and my father as we grew older that, my forgiveness allowed him to actually start forgiving himself and looking and understanding his own history. And through that process, which was a very, very long process, eventually we were able to come to a place and reconnect and have that, which I understand for a lot of people getting out of MLM or in any kind of trauma situation, they're not always going to have that ability to reconnect, but it could also be a place where it allows them to have the full understanding of really what has been happening and what has went on. And through that, they can really find the truth of everything in their own lives.
Yeah, I love that.
My gosh, I feel like I could talk to you for so long. The other really fascinating thing, like the article you just put out, I just kind of want to touch on it and put it out into the atmosphere. Also, because I think it's a admittance of my own, and we've had so many conversations of, that time during COVID and getting swept up in the Freedom Convoy and the conservative flair of the time. And me, my roots are total hippie, total peace, love, Mother Earth, F the establishment, nonconformist. I'd always had a healthy mistrust of the government. That was always there. Yeah. But I got really swept up in it. And it was, and I had to shake myself awake on, at some point after the aftermath of COVID, going, frick, I don't even believe this. I don't even associate with any of these ideologies. And also I was totally ignorant inside of it not recognizing what those ideologies were, just thinking it was, for the freedom of it and F the government and the goodness of it, but not even recognizing what that whole side of the story represented. And it took, having this resistance to how deep that kind of like anti-trans, harsh nastiness around it to wake me up even before I met Terry, to be like, this isn't me. I'm person to person and human to human. I'm stepping outside of this and really reclaiming back to myself quietly, not rocking any boats around the people that I was surrounded by, because lots of them were on this track. And I think often lots of them too don't even realize all that they're representing. So that's a long-winded way to say, Terry, we had so many good conversations and he showed the whole other perspective on it. And again, it was another thing that I got swept up in and kind of chameleoned into that isn't part of my value system and belief system. So can you speak to that? Because you had that experience too.
Yeah. So it was like one of those things that were put on the shelf of like, how come like there's this package of beliefs? Like it felt, it moved away from like you said, Sandy, just being like a hippie and like, I'm going to question everything, to like, no, we believe all of these things in this little box. And it's like, who decided? Who decided all of these things are the package deal that we all have to believe? And how is this free thinking? Because we're all like parroting the same beliefs. So where's the freedom in that? And also, I'm really fucking scared now. So how am I not in another type of trap and box and scared and all of that? The other piece to it too was like and this is why I really like the podcast from Maintenance Phase about COVID conspiracies, because they like, it's a bit of a blur. So if you listen to it, you're like, oh yeah, and then that happened. It's like things kept changing and morphing, and it was like, and mistakes were made, and like, like certainly nothing was perfect. But like within the Juice Plus community, it was like, first, it doesn't exist. It's not even a thing. Then it does exist, but it's a pandemic. And then you can just like protect yourself through whole food nutrition, but then also have ivermectin. It's like, well, hold on a second. Like, what? But that's not natural. Isn't that like some weird, like, what even is that? How is that part of the box now? How part of the package? Like things were like not lining up, and it was dizzying.
Geez, it's like, again, too, like think of the company speak with Juice Plus. This is what we say for this. This is what we say for this. Adopt this. Then you take out any kind of critical thinking. It was the same for that. Like for me, I'd never been interested in politics, truly. Still ain't. And yet they would tell you this. So that was like your catchphrase or your line that you had about it, without really true education. Like, would you have agreed with that? I think the way you described it, the box thinking is so bang on.
I had a team member who would be more liberal on a call where we had a special guest, this like Southern top leader who probably know if I imitate him. And he was like, I call it the China virus. And she was like typing to me, did he just say China virus? Like, what is this even about? Like, what is this call? What, like, because this doesn't seem like it's on topic right now.
Crazy.
So, yeah. Like, this is how we talk about it. We call it the China virus. We make jokes about it, and it's like, and it serves to like feel like this, you're part of this like secretive like community with these inside jokes and this whole like belief system that's counterculture, which can be addictive. And
so, and it took you a while to share that part of your story. And you coined a phrase. Yeah. What was it started with a C, conspirituality.
Conspirituality. Yeah. That's that book right there. Can you see it on my shelf?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good book. They basically, after COVID, these three authors decided to like, where did this all start? Like, where did this like cluster of beliefs begin? And they just disseminate it, and it's really fascinating. But yeah, it did take me a long time because I still find myself like bumping up against it in my real life, because I always have been kind of like, my mom used to call, I don't know if this is like a 90s reference, but my mom used to call my husband and I Dharma and Greg.
Oh yeah.
Because I was always like, yeah, I was always like the free thinking, and he was more like the science minded, just like, yeah, intellectualized partner. And that vibe, that dynamic really worked for us. And I asked him about that actually recently. Like, do you miss that part of me? Like, do you miss the part of me that was just so much more woo and so much more just like trust, don't think those thoughts, blah, 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 like the magical part of me. And he was like, I loved it. It was romantic. It was like kept some magic alive for me in my world, because I don't think that way. So it was like, it was nice, but also I love to see you evolve and grow and think. And like, I'm really glad you are where you are. So he has an appreciation for the whole journey. But yeah, it did take me a long time to share it, because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't feel really super clear still to this day. The world's fucking confusing and nuanced as hell. So I don't ever want to come across as like knowing all of the answers, but I just wanted to kind of encourage people to ask questions.
I love that. Speaking of your husband, like, so he's seen you go through this huge transformation, and there's probably been a lot of changes. Does he feel like he's got the real you back?
Okay. So my husband, does he feel like he has the real me back?
Yeah. Or have a truer version of you? Like, what has been his experience in all of this? And has he had to do some healing and understanding of himself?
I mean, like, his involvement was really like supportive and peripheral. Like, he wasn't in all the Zoom meetings. He didn't hear I'm still filling him in on stuff that he wasn't aware of, which is another, they say that cults isolate you. And certainly I'm like under the same roof, but I'm living in a whole other reality. But again, like, I think he's just really appreciated he's really proud of me. He's really excited that I'm seeing clients now. And like, he lights up, like when I'm like, get out of a session, he's like, I love this. Like, he's just excited, because for so long he's supported this like thing. And now it's like, okay, I actually did a real thing. Like, I actually went to school and I'm submitting papers and getting grades, and now seeing clients and actually getting paid, and all of these, like, really, it's comforting. It's so much more peace for him to know that, like, we can calculate and figure out what my income is after so many years of uncertainty and all of the pressure being on him. And also our conversations are just so much more open and interesting. And, because I was just in this bubble for so long that it's hard to have a real, like, intellectual intimacy when you're just living this little bubble. So that's improved.
For sure. So as we're kind of bringing this conversation to a close, again, could talk to you for hours, but if someone's listening and they're still inside of it, and what advice would you have to offer them? And how would you share that, like, kind of any support of that kind of world, the MLM world, is complicity?
Yeah, that's a good question, because like, cults thrive on the peripheral members, because those are the ones that legitimize it and say, I don't know, like, I had a good time. So it's like, not 100% of people who go in are going to feel the level of damage that I feel, or that you feel, Sandy. Some people are going to be like, I don't know, I got some products and fine. And another argument could be, well, like one of the arguments that I got is like, well, we all have phones and we don't know where the parts to the phones go. And so like, where does it end? Like, where does, or how do you know your diamond isn't a blood diamond, and et cetera, et cetera. For me, there are an overwhelming amount of issues like sweatshops and all of these things that are terrible. And if you're aware of them and they come onto your radar, then it's probably a good idea to consider your consumer choices. Within reason, within like having to live your life in the world that we find ourselves in. When it comes to multi-level marketing, though, for me, the issue is the literal flipping on its head of feminism and empowerment, where it is such a bastardization of values that is presented, and then the reality of that if you know that, then how can you give a penny to something that supports that supports the lying and exploitation of your neighbor, your sister, your daughter, whoever. So
so good. Do you have any more questions?
Well, I just think I like what you said about choices, first of all, and I think that was the biggest thing that I think MLM disguises itself as. And that's what I would say to people is MLM does a good job at disguising itself as a choice for all of these things, that when really it's designed in a way that it's taking away a lot of choices and informed choices with the deception. And the other thing I'd add is something to look at is just I really believe that it stems from the long-term erosion of trust. So when you guys were talking about the right wing, kind of how people gravitate towards that right wing conspiracy, and it's like our conversations of how can we get to this place, or how can you get to this place, or other people, where everything is packaged, like you said, really neatly. It's you can't just have question one belief, and maybe you do have some beliefs around some of the things they're saying, but in order to be part of this group, you have to accept everything. And MLM does that a very good job of that as well. And that's where I see the similarities. And it really stems from, in my mind, this is just my opinion, but that long-term erosion of self-trust, because you're living a lie for so long that you do not trust yourself, and you're just open and vulnerable to accepting all of these things as a package instead of doing what, you like, I know Sandy had the ability at one point to look at everything, case by case, person by person, human by human, issue by issue, and just make decisions based on what she felt and what she knew to be. So I would just encourage, I just love what you said about the packaging everything as a whole, having to accept the entire package. And I believe that erosion of trust in MLM is really a huge part of that when you can't trust yourself anymore, you're just really open to believing a lot of what anybody might say if it touches on one little point that makes you feel accepted or part of the crowd, or validates something that you might have. You're willing to take it all. And
if you speak out, you're ostracized.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, because it isolates you not only from your family and your actual like physical community, but it isolates you from yourself. When you're saying like you can't trust yourself, that's like an isolation from your own self. There's no more isolating you can be. And I was going to say, further to your question, Sandy, about like advice for somebody who's still in, I would say like disconnect for a week, like just fully disconnect. When I was reading about Stephen Hassan, who created the BITE model, and I was reading about his story within the Moonies, and it took him getting into a car accident and being in the hospital where he wasn't able to attend meetings, and that's when his inner voice started to speak up. I was like, oh, damn, that's kind of what happened to me. So if you take one step and it's just like a disconnect, like take a week offline, see what happens.
Yeah, that's such good
advice. What does your voice say?
I love that. Oh my goodness. I can't thank you enough. We're going to link all the things in our show notes. And because you're our first interview, we're creating a tradition, and we'll close the podcast with asking, Can you share with us your love story?
Okay. Oh, so my husband and we got married in 2010, but we started dating in the year 2000, and I think the year 2000 actually, because we got married after 10 years dating. And we met because I was dating his friend. And when his friend went off to college and wanted to be single, me and my husband, his name is Neville, we started hanging out because we really liked being friends. So we were friends first. We got along great and made each other laugh. And other people started to see it before we did, like, you guys are in love. And then he didn't want to break guy code and like date his friend's ex. So we tried not to for a long time, and then eventually succumbed to the love. And we're super happily married. We never fight because we have that best friend foundation first and foremost.
I love that. And how important has telling the truth been in your relationship over all these years and versions of each other you've witnessed?
Yeah, I will say that the first 10 years, like before marriage, that first decade together was pretty freaking rocky as we were like going through different like iterations of ourselves and finding ourselves as young adults in our 20s. We went through some shit. We even had like a little minor break. But we had to continue to commit to working on our relationship. And I felt like a deep knowing within me that he was my husband. And so I was always willing to do whatever work necessary and have the conversations. And I think that's a big piece of it as well. It's not just like perfection and bliss, but like a good 10 years of like hard work to get to where we're at, where we've been through some shit.
I love that. It's so real. Like it's not just the fairy tale, and it's worth working on. And what have you learned the most from him and from being in true partnership and sacred union with him all these years?
What have I learned from him? That's a good question. He, like I said, he's very like science minded, but he's also an artist. He works in the film industry as a scenic artist. That's a good question. I mean, he's very philosophical and he's very intellectual. So like, in order to have a relationship with him, like I got to be willing to go there and like have like big conversations, talk about big topics. Some things I'm like off limits. I can't go there. It scares me too much to talk about bombs and stuff. So we're very, very different and very yin and yang as well, because we have aspects of ourselves. Like both of us are very romantic and believe in like forever love. So we both have that like common, really uniting force within us both, where we've always believed in marriage and things. But then we have also this very opposite part of ourselves as well. Whereas like I'm more flighty and like trust in my intuition and go with the flow. And he's more like analysis paralysis, have to know all the information before I make one step forward kind of thing. So we balance each other out in that way. So I would say that would be the thing that I learned most from him, is if I didn't have him, I would be more extreme in general. I used to say I'd be a raw food vegan if he didn't exist, because he would always make sure I like had delicious cheese and like had good wine and like kind of brought that like levity to my rigid ways.
I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And again, just looking forward to staying connected and in full support of all the amazing work you're doing in the world.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandie.